What are the most despicable crimes people will do? Let's find out, starting with number 5, Prince scamming. Shareza Jackson thought she had hit the jackpot when she reconnected with Dorian Wilkerson. Little did she know that reconnecting with him would be the greatest mistake of her life. She had known Wilkerson since high school and remembered him as a good-looking athletic guy who played football and ran track. And while Wilkerson did run something, it turns out it wasn't track. It was a scam that cost Shareza about $1.4 million. When they reconnected, Shareza was a single mother raising 2 daughters with a high-flying career as a regional director at a Fortune 500 company. Wilkerson told her that she wasn't doing badly for himself either, and that he was a medical doctor who also worked at the CDC. Shareza believed Wilkerson was the last missing piece in her life, and she fell completely in love with her Prince Charming. 2 years later, the couple tied the knot in front of 200 guests. The relationship was supposed to open a new chapter of bliss in Shareza's life, but all it ended up doing was running her into over $1 million in debt and handing her a divorce barely 7 years later. The fairy tale turned horror story started simply when Wilkerson messaged her through Facebook. He told her that he had become a doctor at Emory Hospital in Atlanta and an epidemiologist for the CDC. Shareza wasn't doing bad for herself either, and she liked that he was accomplished, driven, and also seemed to have a passion for philanthropy. At the time, Wilkerson lived in Atlanta and Shareza lived in Florida, so they didn't meet up right away. However, a business trip took Shareza to Atlanta, and Wilkerson was on hand to welcome her. He took her to his apartment, and they had a fantastic time getting reacquainted. He showered her with gifts and attention, and she soon fell in love with him. They got married, and her daughters were so smitten by him that they even changed their last names to his. But then, Wilkerson started to show his true colors. A year into their marriage, Wilkerson insisted that Shareza open a cosmetic center that would offer breast augmentation, tummy tucks, and Brazilian butt lifts. Shareza provided around $400,000 in startup capital from her retirement. Wilkerson was in charge of the day-to-day activities of the center, but months later, Shareza discovered that the place was losing money. It was so bad that she had to quit her job and take over operations full-time to stop the place from going out of business. She asked Wilkerson about the missing money from the center, but he always had an excuse that explained things. That was when Shareza started hearing troubling stories from other people. Friends of Wilkerson's ex-wife texted her and told her about how he had scammed his ex for 16 years. Of course, Shareza didn't want to believe the stories, but she had no choice when she saw a text from Wilkerson to his friend saying he no longer wanted to be with her because she was broke. Shareza then found out that Wilkerson had been using her name to get thousands of dollars in loans and had been stealing from her through her credit card. She also found out that he wasn't a doctor and had actually received a cease and desist letter from the Florida Department of Health. But somehow, that was just the beginning. Further digging revealed that not only was Wilkerson not a doctor, but he was actually a convicted felon who was on probation. Because, why not? Wilkerson had been arrested for fraud in 2002. Then there were the charges for beating someone up in 2007, and the same charges again in 2009. His 2002 arrest was based on charges of extorting and defrauding someone of over $75,000. But somehow, Wilkerson had managed to avoid doing any sort of time behind bars. When Shareza finally confronted him with evidence of his past, he tried to file some nonsense police report about their joint finances to get her arrested, but it didn't work. In the end, Shareza filed for divorce and brought a civil suit against Wilkerson. The suit outlined Wilkerson's pattern of lies and mischief and also alleged that he was unfaithful in his marriage to Shareza. Shareza is trying to rebuild her life and has released a book talking about her experience with Wilkerson called Successful Women Get Played Too. What's crazy about this story is that even though Wilkerson scammed Shareza out of over $1 million, somehow the guy still isn't in jail. She said she thinks he's living with some new girl now, probably up to his same old tricks. Number 4, the fake inheritance. Steve Edward Riley Jr. had his life taken by his girlfriend after she found out he was going to be $30 million richer through an inheritance. She thought poisoning him would allow her to claim the inheritance, which wasn't only just incorrect, but no such inheritance actually existed. Before there was even any talk of an inheritance, Steve had wanted to break up with his girlfriend, Ina Thea Knoyer. Knoyer was apparently a lazy, jobless mooch to Steve, and Steve's patience had worn thin. They both knew their relationship was on its last legs. But once Steve got news of the phantom $30 million inheritance he was about to get, everything changed. Breaking up with his girlfriend now seemed a distant concern that paled in comparison to securing the inheritance. But here's the thing. Steve had no wealthy relatives that he could reasonably expect such an inheritance from. And yet, somehow, he truly believed that it was real all the same. Unfortunately, Steve wasn't the only one thinking of securing the inheritance. Knoyer somehow believed in an obscure law that said long-term girlfriends of deceased men could be seen as their common-law wives, and as such, they would be entitled to inheritance of such deceased persons. To Knoyer, this meant that the only obstacle to obtaining the $30 million for herself was Steve. So, she filled his beer cup with antifreeze, somehow got him to drink it, then didn't call the cops until a day later as Steve became more and more sick. When paramedics eventually arrived, Steve was far too sick to completely recover, and he passed away a day after being admitted to a hospital. When asked what happened, Knoyer said that he'd been drinking beer the day before and had gotten a heat stroke. However, an autopsy proved that Steve hadn't drunk beer the day before. A search of the premises revealed a Windex bottle suspected to contain antifreeze, as well as a beer bottle and a mug that were suspected to contain antifreeze. And thus, Knoyer was arrested. After interrogating Knoyer, she confessed to the police that she thought she would be entitled to Steve's inheritance because she was his common-law wife. Unfortunately for her, the state she lived in didn't recognize that statute, so Steve's passing was for nothing. Perhaps she should have done some light Googling before trying to take someone's life over some outdated law. What makes the case even worse is that investigators later discovered that there was no inheritance and that Steve had probably fallen for a scam. So Knoyer just planned the dumbest and most despicable crime for nothing. Although he can't figure out why Steve thought that he was getting that much money from a rich family member he didn't know of in the first place, why on earth would he tell his girlfriend he was planning to break up with that he had a huge inheritance coming? Number 3. The Rogue Contractor. Alan Middleton swindled his clients out of more than £500,000 through a comprehensive and complex operation that took authorities months to uncover. Middleton spent the money he got from the fraud on expensive trips to Gibraltar and the Italian Grand Prix. He essentially had the time of his life on other people's dime. Middleton ran a construction company that took steps to get contracts dishonestly. First, he forged a Federation of Master Builders insurance document to suggest he was insured to perform construction jobs. Second, he told his clients that he only worked on one job at a time, but they would later find out that he was working on several projects at the same time and he hardly completed them. Third, Middleton inflated supplier invoices and faked his VAT number, which is like a US tax ID number, all in a bid to extract more money from his clients. Then he made sure he never told his clients that his construction company had been previously bankrupt, which was a crime in itself. And finally, he refused to complete the jobs he had been paid fully for. But Middleton and his wife, Katie Middleton, who didn't marry Prince William, were just crooks in the office. They were also crooks at home. The Middletons committed mortgage fraud by pretending they weren't in a relationship and that Katie earned a salary of over £100,000. If they hadn't run this part of the fraud, they might not have landed the mortgage because of Middleton's bankruptcies. But the Middletons couldn't get away with their scheming ways forever. They were reported to the authorities and investigations of their business practices began. Alan Middleton tried to go under the radar by changing his name, but it was too late. He was eventually arrested, prosecuted, and jailed for a total of 4 years and 6 months. Katie got a 9-month sentence that was suspended for 18 months. Sadly, Middleton's clients still have to bear the cost of their unfinished construction projects, and their story is hardly unique. Pretty much everyone has a horror story about a nightmare contractor, and the toll on the victims of shoddy home construction and renovation is far more catastrophic than you'd think. So this is a fantastic reminder to make sure and vet anyone doing work on your home. It's just so easy for them to take shortcuts, not to do things to code, or to just abandon the job altogether. Remember, you pay for what you get. Number 2. Like father, like son. Gaston de la Torre, son of notorious Argentinian bank robber Ruben Alberto de la Torre, was arrested in connection to an investigation into a large nose beer distribution network. And yes, nose beers are exactly the type of beer you're thinking of, but less beer-y and more powder-y. Gaston's father, Ruben, is one of Argentina's most dangerous criminals and is infamous for the robbery of the century, which saw $15 million stolen from a bank in Argentina in 2006. Unfortunately for Ruben, and fortunately for the people of Argentina, he didn't get away with his crime and was sentenced to 15 years in prison thanks to his wife. Ruben's son resumed his father's criminal career. Gaston popped up on police radar because of his dealings with a known criminal organization that was looking to transport truckloads of nose beers into Buenos Aires. This led to a sting operation where Gaston was arrested with 8 other guys involved in the business. The police confiscated Gaston's Chevy Cruze, several cell phones, 2 laptops, a tablet, security surveillance cameras, and a notepad. They also confiscated the nose beers that Gaston and his gang were moving. Knowing Gaston's history and who his father was kind of makes you feel a bit bad for the guy. His father was a hardened criminal, and he's found his way into that life as well. Do you think Gaston was always doomed to a life of crime because of his father? Let us know in the comments. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay right here for our past release to find out how these ladies love to do their crimes. Number 1. Their parents didn't matter. Gary Mansell and his second wife Diane worked very hard to defraud Gary's parents, ensuring they spent the last days of their lives in horrifying conditions and pennies to their name. The sad story all began when Fred Mansell, Gary's father, who was 77 years old at the time, suffered a fall and went to a rehabilitation clinic. His wife Enid, at the time, was showing signs of dementia, so a decision to move her into her son's detached home was made. The couple granted their son power of attorney and gave him the responsibility of caring for them and also taking care of their property, which was worth over £250,000. The plan was that Gary and his wife would look after Fred and his wife so they didn't need to go into a care home in their old age. Instead of doing that, Gary and his wife decided to ignore his parents and live large on their dime. First of all, Gary sold his parents' house for £100,000 less than it was worth, which is just so stupid, just so he could get his hands on the cash and spend it on a lavish new extension and kitchen. But instead of using that new kitchen to cook meals for the people that wiped his butt for him when he was little, Gary gave his parents pathetic microwave dinners and let them sit totally isolated in the home extension. The care Fred and Enid got was likely far worse than they would have gotten in a care home. Gary held a good job that paid almost £100,000 a year, and Diane ran a curtain business until it went bankrupt. The pair lived a comfortable life, but it didn't afford them the sort of luxury they thought they were entitled to. So when Gary's parents' fortune and power of attorney dropped in his lap, he splurged. The couple had steak dinners, flew in first-class cabins, went on expensive trips to Jamaica and Cape Verde, and even bought a brand new Land Rover. The couple also had expensive stays in hotels and spent money on designer bags and scents. Diane spent over £9,000 on cosmetic work as well. While all of this happened, Fred and his wife Enid were almost completely isolated at home. During their 3.5-year stay with Gary, they only went on vacation once to Wales, where they barely left the hotel. Sadly, Enid passed away, and Fred finally realized what his only son had been doing with his money. The knowledge broke him so much that he said he no longer wanted to live. Social workers got involved, and Fred had to be moved into a care home while Gary and his wife faced the music. The couple had their day in court, and a disgusted judge sentenced both of them to prison for 6 years. The judge said that they had both carried out the most despicable display of greed and vanity he had ever seen, just so that they could live the life of their dreams. It's hard to disagree with that. This is what happens when female psychopaths start scamming. Let's get right into it. Number 4. City girls behind city bars. Before City Girls, singer JT was known as Jatavia Johnson, a Miami girl who came from nothing. Hailing from a bad neighborhood, JT was among the youngest of 16 brothers and sisters. After she reached 7th grade, JT was put out on her own, sometimes staying with an aunt, and other times crashing at friends' houses. JT had various day jobs, from Whole Foods to Burger King, always working, but but still struggling to make ends meet. Getting fed up with the life she had, JT used a handful of stolen credit card numbers to buy clothes and various gift cards she felt she deserved. JT showed off this time of her life in photos she posted on her social media. Gifts for her niece, a digital camera for a vacation, makeup artists for night outs with the girls. She was eventually arrested in June of 2017 at a Nordstrom after buying a pair of shoes. Shortly after her arrest, JT and the other half of City Girls, Young Miami, were discovered by hip-hop label Quality Control. And by Christmas, City Girls had released their first official single, a song we're not going to repeat. We're pretty sure this song isn't going to challenge Mariah Carey for most played song at Christmas anytime soon. Also released around the same time was Where the Bag At, a song about demanding money, where JT repeats deeply poetic lines describing that she needs someone, quote, who gonna swipe them visas? This likely didn't help her case. JT pled guilty to aggravated identity theft and was sentenced to 24 months in federal prison. Her lawyer provided a schedule of upcoming City Girl shows leading up to a major appearance at the BET Awards in June of that year, so the judge agreed to push back JT's surrender date. Then, a week before she was set to go in, JT's lawyer requested another delay on account of a recent co-sign with Canada's favorite son, Drake, leaning into the fact that JT was a rising superstar in the hip-hop industry. The requested extension wasn't fully granted, but JT was permitted to perform at the award show and finish her verse for Drake. After completing her commitments, JT honored her sentence and showed up to serve her time. JT began her prison term in July 2018 and was set to be released on March 1, 2020. In the meantime, City Girls continued to release singles and tracks with the other half of the group, Young Miami, doing everything she could to promote their music. In an attempt to get an early release, JT argued her good behavior for over a year should qualify her, leaving about 8.5 months of her sentence remaining. While the request was denied, JT was transferred to a halfway house 5 months before her scheduled release, allowing her to continue her career. Since her incarceration and release, JT has amassed a net worth of $1.5 million. That net worth mostly comes from the group's high appearance fees. They charge $40,000 for TV appearances and $15,000 for nightclub appearances. Looks like she found a new way to rip people off. Number 3, her mantra was to steal. Amanda Knorr, 35, was one of 3 people charged over a green energy scheme that defrauded over 300 investors. Knorr and her college boyfriend, Troy Ragg, founded MantraCore. Knorr's company, Mantra, focused on green community development, socially responsible investing, distressed real estate fund management, mortgage banking, renewable energy, music and entertainment, and philanthropy. So pretty much everything. The couple received more than $54 million from hundreds of investors within 4 years based on promises of technology that would turn trash into fuel and carbon-negative housing developments, neither of which were ever fully developed. MantraCore is known as the largest green energy scam the U.S. has ever seen. Many victims lost their entire life savings. Mantra was a Ponzi scheme in which new investor money was used to pay earnings to prior investors, often without any actual product being sold. Mantra's pitch was centered primarily around a venture to produce biochar and a green real estate development in Tennessee. Biochar is a charcoal-like substance made by burning organic material in a process called pyrolysis. Biochar was supposed to take waste like used tires and household garbage and convert it into an energy source and a fertilizer. By spreading this stuff all over your field, it could pull toxins out of the atmosphere. Knorr and Ragg were both honored by former President Bill Clinton, a real pillar of morality himself, during a 2009 ceremony for the Clinton Global Initiative for their plans to develop biochar technology that they said would sequester carbon dioxide and reduce emissions in developing countries. Knorr and Ragg lied to investors, along with Colorado wealth advisor Wade McKelvey. McKelvey ran get-rich-quick seminars to pitch their biochar technology and a carbon-negative housing development in Tennessee. Through his Speed of Wealth seminars, one featuring John Elway, McAfee overstated claims that Mantra had already made millions of dollars and promised investment returns as high as 484%. McLevy specifically targeted elderly investors and taught them how to liquidate all their assets, such as mutual funds and 401k plans, then told them to take out as many loans as possible and invest it all in Mantra. Many of them did. However, Mantra's environmental initiatives hadn't been profitable. Biochar is very expensive to produce, and Mantra only had one plant that was just starting out, not the claimed 25. The housing development wasn't anything more than vacant lots resold at a loss, and the early returns paid to investors had been funded almost exclusively from new investments. So where did all these retirees' life savings go? Ragg claims he didn't spend lavishly, despite the influx of millions to their company, merely living in a 1,200 square foot home, and said there was no Lamborghini parked out front. He was, however, driving around in a Mercedes SLK 350 with a Mantra Vanity license plate. Granted, it's not an elite luxury vehicle, but it's not a Honda Civic either. Along with funding their lifestyles, there was the creation of Mantra Records, a record label that invested money in a rapper called Ice Block. Mantra Records funded a music video for Ice Block that ridiculously featured Ragg and Noor. A lawsuit was able to recover about $6 million for victims of the scheme. Another $800,000 was placed in a receivership but has yet to be paid out. Of the $54 million invested in Mantra, $17 million had been paid out to early investors. But when the Securities Exchange Commission shut Mantra down, only $790,000 remained from the other $37 million. Noor and Ragg both pled guilty after being charged. While out on bail, waiting for his sentence, Ragg hatched another scheme where he solicited an investment in an online video dating service that was about to be purchased by a well-known entrepreneur. Of course, there was no deal, and the victim lost her entire investment. Troy Ragg was deemed a continued threat to the public and received a harsher sentence of 22 years in prison and $54 million restitution. Wade McKelvey was sentenced to 18 years in prison, 5 years of supervised release, and ordered to pay $37 million restitution. Amanda Noor was sentenced in Philadelphia federal court to only 30 months in federal prison and ordered to pay $37 million restitution. Maybe these three should invest in a little morality. Number 2. Give me your tax returns. Tanya M. Fox spent $4 million on a BMW 7 Series, an Infiniti M35, a Chrysler Crossfire, Volkswagen Beetle, and a Maserati, 2 cosmetic surgeries, and she opened a restaurant in Orlando, Florida. But Fox didn't earn her $4 million the old-fashioned way our fathers and grandfathers did, by playing the state lottery. She actually opened bank accounts in the name of fake tax prep businesses to file for fraudulent returns, then used other people to withdraw those returns. Fox filed over 3,590 false tax returns on behalf of 3,023 different victims. Fox used social security numbers, dates of birth, and names of patients, most of whom were teenagers, at the health department to file the returns and obtain nearly $4.1 million. 2 health department employees, Shantarisha Smith and Gerald Williams, and Williams' brother Delray Duncan, were arrested, admitting that they were paid roughly $45,000 to steal patients' information. The investigation started when sheriffs were searching a house and discovered a handwritten list with about 150 names, dates of birth, and social security numbers. During her trial, Fox was deemed the mastermind behind the scheme, given the more severe punishment of 20 years for aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy, as well as theft of government property. While the sentence was viewed by some as harsh, the judge brought up the aggravating factor of bribing 3 members of the health department to get her hands on the identities. Further, the majority of the stolen identities belonged to teenagers who will be unaware that their identities had been stolen and the problems that will create until they try to buy a house or a car in the future. All of Fox's assets were seized in order to pay restitution. Her co-conspirator, Gerald Williams, received 4.5 years, Delray Duncan got 3.5, and Shantarika Smith was sentenced to 5 years. Number 1. Queen Tax Fraud. Rashia Wilson was the self-proclaimed queen of IRS tax fraud. Apparently, tax fraud has a monarchy. She posted a message on Facebook in all capital letters for emphasis, claiming that she's a millionaire. For the record, so if we had thought the police indicting her would be easy, it wouldn't be. Honestly, we thought it would have been easy. Wilson promised us that we need more than, quote, black and white to hold her down. That was the message to the rat who went and told on her, although her meaning still seems a bit vague. Wilson's post goes on in disbelief about the police's possible indictment plans, as if the First Lady, so wait, now she's not a queen? Didn't have the Tampa Bay Police Department under her spell. Wait, she's a witch now? Her Majesty reminded us that at the moment she ran Tampa, so she wouldn't have to do any time. But Wilson obviously meant no time other than the 21 years she had gotten for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and being a felon, queen, witch, in possession of a firearm. From April 2009 to September 2012, Queen and First Lady Horatio Wilson and her co-conspirator Maurice J. Larry ran a scheme to defraud the Internal Revenue Service by fraudulently obtaining tax refunds. They received U.S. Treasury checks and prepaid debit cards that were loaded with funds derived from filing false income tax returns in other people's names. Wilson and Larry filed these tax returns from various locations, including Wilson's own home and various hotels throughout Tampa. Wilson and Larry then used these refunds to make hundreds of thousands of dollars in retail purchases, to buy money orders, and to withdraw cash. During the unpredicted investigation, agents searched Wilson's house and Larry's storage unit, where they discovered thousands of names and social security numbers. Agents also found high-end accessories, jewelry, and a firearm in Wilson's home. Further additional reloadable debit cards loaded with fraudulent tax refunds were found in both locations. Wilson, who often referred to herself as the First Lady and Queen of Tax Fraud, title she chose for herself, spent $30,000 on her daughter's first birthday party and had purchased a new Audi for $90,000. The IRS estimated that the actual loss from Wilson and Larry's scheme was $2,240,096.39, though the royal couple's potential theft was in excess of $11 million. At her trial, Wilson's defense brought in a psychologist who explained that she suffers from bipolar disorder that was first diagnosed from a young age, and that the absurd bragging is consistent with her disorder. Wilson had a rough upbringing, struggled in school, and eventually dropped out. However, the judge couldn't ignore the fact that Wilson stole over $3 million from the government. An unfortunate upbringing with a mental disorder didn't give her a pass. The judge sentenced Horatio Wilson to 21 years in federal prison for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and being a felon in possession of a firearm, as well as the forfeiture of $2,240,096.39, which constitutes the proceeds traceable to the offense. This was quite an unusually hefty sentence for the amount of money she had stolen. In fact, a petition was set up on change.org calling for a lesser sentence for her. It probably didn't help her case that she chose to scam the government and that she talked trash while doing it. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comment section what you'd rather have: the power to teleport anywhere instantly, or the ability to read minds at will.